Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Ambassador Bolton. It's good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Go ahead, do it.
Okay, so my recording already started, so I'm going to go to the questions. So last time we spoke, Ambassador Bolton, was March 2025. It was immediately after President Donald Trump took office in his second mandate. We were discussing about Ukraine, and you were saying you did not seem at the moment to see any clear foreign strategy in the Trump administration. But a lot has happened since then, right? We had U.S. attacks on Iran, on the nuclear facilities, the meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska in summer. Then we had the statements, the concerning statements over Greenland, Canada, criticism over EU and NATO, Venezuela, and now we have again Iran and maybe Cuba next, who knows? So my question to you is, do you still think that there is no clear foreign strategy in the Trump administration? And what do you think of all these events that happened in the last year?
No, I continue to think he does not have a clear strategy. And in fact, the list you just went through, I think, demonstrates that most importantly, because he has surprised the isolationist part of his base, of the MAGA base, by the amount of attention he's given to foreign affairs, and by the kind of interventions that he's made all over the world after having said he wanted to end the endless wars, didn't want to start new ones, wanted to focus on the United States and the economy. And he's doing almost everything but focusing on the U.S. economy. I think the conclusion is that it's just proof of the fundamental point that Trump has no philosophy. He doesn't have a national security grand strategy. He doesn't do policy the way we normally understand that term. And all of this confusion and frantic activity that you see around the world really demonstrates that.
And what do you think he wants right now with Iran? Because we see this war that started 19 days ago. It seems to get more and more intense. What do you think is the final objective? Because he talked about a regime change, but then he said he just wants to destroy the nuclear program, the ballistic missiles program. How far do you think Donald Trump can go with Iran?
I think this, again, is typical Trump behavior. Even as recently as a few days ago in a speech in Kentucky, he said, we don't want to have to come back every 2 years and do this all over again. Well, I think that's a good point. And if you don't want to come back every 2 years, the only sure way to avoid that is to take out the regime in its entirety. I think that the fact that he didn't do consultations with the allies in advance of the war now makes it harder to achieve what is on everybody's mind right now, which is how to open the Strait of Hormuz. I think it was completely predictable that Iran would try to close it. And I'm a little surprised on the military side that they didn't begin to attend to that earlier, sinking all the mine-laying ships, but also going after the anti-ship missile capacities, the ability to mine the strait with fast boats or drones, dropping them into the sea. And it's now really going to be a big focus for the next 2 weeks. And would distract from some of the other aspects of the campaign, and particularly distract from working with the opposition inside Iran, which I don't think we've done nearly enough of. So Trump has put himself in a very difficult position because he plays these things day by day. He's been described as transactional. So the idea of thinking through a complete strategy from where we are on day X to regime change on day Y just isn't something that he does. And I think we're seeing the consequences of his lack of having thought through the contingencies that might arise and how he would deal with them.
But do you think we can really see a regime change in Iran soon?
Well, I think the most likely thing to happen is that what the military is doing now is degrading the institutions of Iranian state power that threaten us, threaten Israel, the Gulf Arabs, Europe, threaten the outside world, and that threaten Iran's own people. So that means primarily the Revolutionary Guard, and its subsidiaries, the Quds Force for external threats and the besieged militia for internal control of the population. Now, the more you destroy those capabilities, the more you leave the impression with everybody in Iran, the correct impression that the regime can't defend itself. And any regime that can't defend itself is not long for the world. So a lot of people, even in the Revolutionary Guard, but in other parts of the government and in the society generally, begin to say this ship is going down and maybe we don't want to go down with it. So that's how you fragment the regime at the top. You pull it apart, you unleash rivalries, you begin to think about what a post-Ayatollah regime would look like. And probably the most benign way out of this is you have a military government that from the regular military, not the Revolutionary Guard, but the conventional army that could restore order, try and get the economy going again, and basically provide space for the Iranian people to decide what they want to do in terms of constitutional structures after the Ayatollahs, because it's not just a matter of replacing a few leaders. Nobody wants the Ayatollah structure, and you can't come in. People say, well, what's your plan for the day after? You can't come in to people who have lived under this regime for 47 years and say, okay, here's your plan, follow it. You have to ask them. They've been there. They have felt the effect of it, and they want to say in it. But that's why they need help from the regular army. It's why, particularly because it's clear Trump doesn't want to use boots on the ground, that you have to have an alternative, and that's provided right there in Iran itself. And nobody's saying it's going to be easy, which is why I said yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, if you don't have the patience and persistence to see this through, don't start it in the first place, because you could end up with an even more extremist group of Ayatollahs and Revolutionary Guard officers if you don't reach the conclusion of, if you don't reach the objective of regime change.
Another important moment of last year was also the meeting, as I was saying, between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. And now we see they seem to have a pretty good relationship, we would say. And when it comes to the war in Ukraine, he still criticizes Volodymyr Zelensky for not wanting to end the war. He doesn't seem to have the same opinion about President Vladimir Putin. How do you see this relationship? And do you think he can actually end this war in Ukraine?
Trump thinks he and Putin are friends. He thinks he and Xi Jinping are friends. He thinks he and Kim Jong-un of North Korea are friends. I don't think those three think they're friends. I think they see somebody who's an easy mark that they can manipulate. And they think very cold-bloodedly in terms of their national interest. And Trump doesn't think that way. He thinks if he has good personal relations with Vladimir Putin, that U.S.-Russian state-to-state relations are good. And that's just simply not true. So, but Putin knows that, and he sees that as a vulnerability, and he plays on it. He did it in Alaska at the Alaska summit very well, and he continues to do it. They had a conversation shortly after the military action against Iran started, where Putin offered to help mediate between the U.S. and Iran. And you know what he's really doing there is building up goodwill with Trump to use against Zelensky and the Ukrainians. So these matters really are linked. In the Russian mind, I think they clearly are, and in China's mind too. So Trump just doesn't think in those broader strategic terms. And unfortunately, neither do a lot of Europeans who think, well, the Ukraine war matters to us, but the war in the Gulf doesn't matter. But it does. And by the way, if China made a move against Taiwan, that would matter to Europe too.
You were saying that Europeans also are concerned with what's happening in Ukraine, but they were also concerned when President Donald Trump criticized the EU and NATO also when he made those statements about Greenland. So we could say that at the moment the relation between the USA and Europe is quite tense. Do you think that the US under President Donald Trump, under this administration, is still a reliable partner for Europe when it comes to security?
Well, I think Trump doesn't fundamentally understand how NATO works, and I don't think he's any friend of NATO, and it's a dangerous period in that respect. And I know many European leaders find dealing with Trump unpleasant. Okay, let's just assume all that's true. So do a lot of Americans, but let's assume it's true. The real point is that NATO provides security for both sides of the Atlantic. And what Europeans should do is grit their teeth and say, we're going to get through the remainder of Trump's term. We're going to try and minimize the amount of damage that he does. We're not going to respond to him in the same juvenile way he behaves to us. And when his term in office is over, then we'll work to repair the damage. I think when European leaders say, well, we've got to be independent, they're making a big mistake. It was a Soviet aim in the Cold War to split the NATO alliance, and they failed. And that's one of the reasons why they lost the Cold War. So it would be tragic if we split the alliance ourselves and gave Russia a freer hand in Europe, which they would have if the U.S. basically said, okay, then we're not responsible for European security.
However, President Donald Trump a few days ago was threatening to quit NATO, actually, at the next summit. So how should European states approach these statements and these threats of President Donald Trump?
Well, I think people have got to be very careful. I wrote in my book about the NATO summit in Brussels in 2018, where he did come very close to withdrawing from NATO. And that threat is a possibility for as long as he remains in office. And so I think, as I say, instead of saying things like Iran is not Europe's war, and regardless of how he refers to NATO or individual European leaders, think in terms of national interest. And national interest seems to me to be unequivocal that keeping NATO strong is very much in Europe's interest. It's in the U.S. interest too.
So at the moment, do you think that all these tensions between Europe and the USA, let's say, are an advantage for Russia and for China as well? How do you think these two countries see what is happening right now in this relationship?
Yeah, I think it's a big plus for Russia and China for the axis that they're building, which they described as a partnership without limits. So there's an old saying: there's no sense interfering when your enemy is committing suicide, and just let him go ahead and do it. So it's a difficult time. NATO has gone through good periods and bad periods. This is not a great period, but I wouldn't just sort of say, okay, well, you can't count on the United States. Trump's not going to be president forever. His views are not a majority view in the country, and people just need to adjust to that. I'm not saying it's pleasant, but the reality is that the strength of the alliance benefits everybody in it, and just walking away from it, whether Trump wants to walk away or Europe wants to walk away, would make all the pieces weaker.
President Donald Trump these days also asked for some help from allies to open the Strait of Ormuz. He first said he needed the help, then he said he doesn't need the help. Last night, however, in a Truth Social post, he also referred to that. Do you think allies should help the United States to actually open the Strait of Ormuz? Or what could happen when it comes to that?
I do think they should help open the Strait of Hormuz because they want oil tankers to be able to exit and get that oil back on the international markets. And the fact is, Iran is a threat to Europe in many respects, more of a threat than it is to the United States. If it got nuclear weapons, right now it has intermediate range ballistic missiles that can reach Eastern and Central Europe. It does not have ICBMs that can reach the United States. And we've already seen evidence of Iranian terrorist activity in Europe, just like we have in North America. So this is part of Europe's overall interest. And just to say we're not going to participate in it, I think is a big mistake.
So there are many talks at the moment about international order, and there are also talks about disorder, world disorder. Actually, President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, was talking about that a few days ago. He was saying that we are now witnessing a world disorder. What do you think of all these changes, the reconfiguration, let's say, of international order? Where does the USA China and Europe stand when it comes to all these changes and shifts?
Well, I don't think there ever was a liberal international order or a rules-based international order. You can't even talk about that without Russia, China, Iran, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, North Korea, Maduro in Venezuela, the Castro regime in Cuba. There's no stability without power. And since 1945, there's been a lot of instability in the world, but the one stable element throughout has been the United States' commitment to have open international trade and commerce, which now Trump has begun to challenge. But the real underlying basis for whatever international order we've had has been the United States and its organization of alliances. When you say it's all we just write rules down on a piece of paper and suddenly that's what provides order is just mistaken. You can write the rules down, but you have to have something to back it up. The world doesn't have a government, and there's no prospect that it will for as far as the eye can see. So the basis of the order has to be the sure knowledge that there's a power that stands behind it. And that's why Trump is so dangerous. If the U.S. walks away, the world will be increasingly disorderly, which will be disadvantageous to the United States, which is why it's such a foolish policy for us, but it'll be even more disadvantageous for everybody else.
So we see that we have so many conflicts at the moment developing in the world, and General Blinken was saying was actually warning last year that we might witness in 2027 two wars at the same time, one that would happen in Asia and another one in Europe. In such a context, let's say, do you think the USA will first intervene to help, let's say, Taiwan if it gets invaded by China, or it will help Europe, the European states, its allies, if Russia, let's say, would start a war here?
Well, it probably depends on which one starts first. In the 1990s, at the end of the Cold War, American military planning was based on the assumption that we had to be prepared to fight and win two medium-sized contingencies, one in the Middle East and one in the Far East, meaning basically North Korea and Iraq or Iran. Today, we're not prepared to fight two medium-sized contingencies. We're having trouble just in Iran because of the shipments of weapons to Ukraine previously. So it shows part of the negative effect of the win in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, when people said, well, we've reached the end of history and, it's a bye-bye to power politics. Military budgets crashed all around the world. Europe's have not recovered. U.S. has not recovered enough. So I think we need to do a lot more military spending, and the U.S. does, and it's why Europe needs to as well. And if people are not prepared to do it, they can complain about it all they want, but when there are powers like China and Russia and some others around the world that don't believe in this famous rules-based international order, they're prepared to resort to force. What's Europe going to do in response?
Okay. Thank you so much, Ambassador Bolton, for all the responses and for your time. It was great to see you again.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to do it.